Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest Wednesday night talk in the church. And tonight we have Professor Deirdre Heenan to talk to us this evening, and there'll be a Q&A afterwards, so you'll all have an opportunity to put your questions to Deirdre, who comes from a very distinguished background. She would be known in media circles. Currently, she writes a weekly column in the Irish News. Had been on The View for about 16 years. She was a regular panellist on that. But in fact, her background is in academia. She's also from County Down, although she is now moved into our parish. But she was originally from Annaclone in County Down, where she went to primary school and thereafter went to Banbridge Academy. After Banbridge Academy, she went to the University of Ulster. And I understand she has multiple degrees from all the various campuses within the University of Ulster structure. After that, she became a reader at the University of Ulster and has made her way up through the academic ladder, and is a professor, has held senior administrative positions in the University of Ulster, and outside academia, as well as the media. She was a member of Michael D. Higgins's first Council of State for 7 years, which I understand was a very exciting time for her. I'm looking forward to hearing a bit about that. She's involved in multiple other organisations, including the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey, which we read about regularly in local media, carry out various opinion polls and assess opinion in Northern Ireland on a whole wide range of issues. She is also involved in the Bengoa review, which is a major review into the health service in Northern Ireland and the provision of healthcare in Northern Ireland. Now, I could talk on for another 5 or 10 minutes, but I'm actually going to hand the microphone or the floor over to Deirdre herself, who will go into it in a bit more detail and certainly with more knowledge. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for asking me. And can I say it feels a bit strange to be sitting here and not down there. It's a whole different perspective when you're sitting up here and the faces are all looking towards you. So I'm accustomed to public speaking, but I am not accustomed to speaking about myself. So this is going to be a little bit strange. But I've been asked to reflect on life and childhood and faith and work. So I suppose what shapes me is I'm from Annaclone in County Down. I don't know if any of you have heard of Annaclone in County Down. What I can tell you to places is 1 mile away from Catesbridge, the coldest and the wettest place in Northern Ireland, always on the map for that particular reason. So I come from a farming family, 7 children, and our first school was the local Protestant primary school. My mother sent us there because we could walk there. It was half a mile away. And I have great memories of that school. There were 30 people in the school, 2 classrooms and an open fire. And what I remember about that school is walking to school, a lot of nature walks, and not very much studying. And we really liked that school. It was a happy place. But when it came to communion, we had to change and go to the Catholic school. And none of us were happy about it. Sorry, Father. We just couldn't understand why we had to leave our friends and go to a different school. And from that school, we then went to Banbridge Academy. And I know Gillian was here, and she reflected on being a Catholic in a Protestant state school in the 1980s. It wasn't easy. Martin Doyle has written a very good book about it, Dirty Linen, and he talked about what it was like. I think there was about 6% Catholics in a mixed grammar school, and there was a lot of bullying, a lot of challenge. And I suppose when I reflect on it now, it was really only at the lower part of the school. When people got to sort of 4th and 5th year, that disappeared, and those things didn't really seem to be that important because you were there to challenge views. So it felt like you were always going home and saying to your mother, do we believe this? Why do we believe this? And then some things, I can remember the RE teacher saying, Catholics go to confession because when the IRA go and shoot people, they can get confession and then go and do it again. I'm thinking, oh no, I'm not very happy about that. So we were there challenging the views about Catholics and what Catholics believed. But also we came to understand that Protestants were not an homogenous group, that there were Methodists, there were Presbyterians, there were Church of Ireland, there were High Church, Low Church. And it was a great way of understanding that we were all Christians. And actually, even though many people didn't really like it, there was only a cigarette paper what we believed and what other churches believed, and there was much more that brought us together than divided us. So we were quite unusual in Annaclone Parish because everyone else went to the Catholic schools. They went to Our Ladies in Newry, or mostly they went to the Newry schools. We didn't go to the Newry schools because my mother was fearful of Newry because it was a lot of trouble in Newry. Banbridge was much closer. It was 10 miles away on the bus. And she had gone to Banbridge Academy, and it was her belief that it was the best school, and therefore that's the school that we would go to. The bishop visited my mother and told her that she was causing scandal, and she was to remove us from the school and take us to Newry. And quite frankly, she sent him packing and said, no, you keep to your business and I'll keep to my business, and they're going to go to this school because I have decided that's what's best for them. So we did. And I suppose that shaped me a lot because you were different, you were set out as different. And we were also different because we lived in that local rural community, but my father was an American. He'd been born in Chicago and lived there for his first 12 years of his life. So when he came back to Ireland, his father brought him back with his brother. He told them that they were going on holidays to Ireland, but actually they never came back. They were returning to the farmstead that his father had left. And he always felt like an outsider because he wasn't born of the land. He wasn't a natural farmer. I think he was always a bit unsettled about farming, but felt that this is a course that had been decided for him and he would have to do it. And being a farmer's daughter was a lot of the reserve army of labour. I don't know if any of you have been brought up on a farm, but it's a work ethic. There's a lot of work. There's no escaping work. You were expected to be out doing things, hay, potatoes, all sorts of farming activity. And of course you can look back now with rose-tinted spectacles and say, well, it was great for us, but at the time you thought, oh no, not again, what are we being sent out to do now? So I quickly realised if I was going to have to work, I would want to be paid for it. So I got a job in Woolworths in Banbridge by telling them I was 16 when I was in fact just about 15. And I sometimes reflected that was probably the best job I ever had because I was the record girl in Woolworths and none of the other people who worked in it were interested in the records. So you got paid for standing behind a record counter and playing the music that you wanted to play. And of course at that time, this is really aging me now, there were 6-inch shingles and picture singles and they were sent to Woolworths for promotions and of course no one else wanted them. So I became really popular in school because I was able to say, oh, I can get all these things. And then at 16, my sister, who was 24, said she was going to New York for 6 weeks. And I asked my mother, could I go with her, fully expecting her to say no. And she went, well, yeah, okay. So I had never been to Belfast when I landed in New York. My mother thought Belfast was a scary place. And when she turned on the television, she said, those people are all mad. I don't know what they're doing. But she was quite happy for me to go to New York and go up and down the subway because she didn't really know and she didn't think it was dangerous. And again, that really gave me a broader perspective on life and I began to understand different cultures and see things that I had never seen before at a young age. So at 18, there was no discussion in our house about going to university. The expectation was you would go to university. My mother said, you have a choice. You can go to university or marry a farmer. And no disrespect to farmers, but I definitely knew I did not want to marry a farmer because they never leave the house and it's constant teas and food. And I thought, no, I want to marry someone who leaves the house, so I'm going to go to university. And I had decided to do law and was all set to go to Leicester to do law. And at the final hour, I thought, I don't know why I'm doing this. I have no interest in law and actually I don't really know anything about it. And I had an O-level in social and economic history and was really interested in the labour movement, the Fabian movement, the trade unions, the suffragettes. and just managed to get into the University of Ulster to study social policy. And that for me was the beginning of a career where I never really feel like I had to work a day, because everything I looked at, I cared about, I was interested in. You know, what's the role of the government? What's the role of the state? Why do we have poverty? Who do we tax? Where should our money go? What does a government look like? So all of those things, I thought, yeah, I really like this. I was interested. So I did a degree, and then I followed that with a PhD in social policy. And then unusually, I decided that I would do a teaching qualification, because then in universities, you just went in to teach students with absolutely no teaching qualification, no experience in how to teach. So I did a teaching qualification and then a master's in education, because I was interested in education. So I started at the very bottom, the lowest rung in the ladder. I was a part-time researcher, then a researcher, then a part-time lecturer, then a lecturer, then a senior lecturer, then a reader, and then a professor. And my good friend Paul is here, and we started at the same time, and we're both 32 years in Ulster University, and we were very similar, because when I got into the university, I thought, no, I could sit as a lecturer for the rest of my career, but I want to be a professor, because that's the pinnacle of an academic career. And I know this sounds arrogant, and it was terrible at the time, because it was ambitious, and women weren't really supposed to be that ambitious. And I thought, I want to be a professor, and I want to be one before I'm 40. Because I looked around and thought, that's the age where it looks like it's an achievement. So I made it at 39, and I know Paul also made it, so we worked hard to make that. And that's about publishing, it's about bringing in external money, it's about having PhD students, it's about writing papers, and also you have to have a sense that you have changed policy around you. So shortly after becoming a professor, I thought that was it, and then the job of a dean became available, so I thought, well, yeah, I'll go for that. So I was appointed to dean. Then the provost of the Magee campus, who's in charge of the Magee campus, he retired. And at that time, provosts were older men, usually men over 70, who'd had an academic career and who had finished. And I thought, well, I'll go for that. And everyone said, no, you're not going to get it. And don't do it, because that's not really what a provost is. But I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I applied for it, and to the surprise of many, got it. So became the first female provost of Magee campus. Then I decided that wasn't punishment enough. I applied to be the provost of Coleraine at the same time, and then applied to be the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Communication. So for 5 years, held those 3 senior posts simultaneously, and it was wonderful. It was exhausting. It was 7 in the morning to usually late at night and weekends. And what I didn't mention, of course, is during that academic career, I also got married to Rory. And I'd like to tell you a very romantic story about Rory, but I actually met him at a card game. And he was with his friends, all male, and they sort of said, well, we'll let her play because she's a girl and she won't really know how to play cards. But what I didn't tell him is my father used to run whist drives in our house. So actually, I beat them all, won the money, and I think that's when he fell for me. He thought this woman actually might be able to win some money for us. And then we had 3 boys, 2 are here, Jack and Harry. And Matthew's not here. So Jack and Harry are both in Belfast, and Matthew's a teacher in Manchester. So we had 3 children under 4, which was busy, hectic, but sure, we wouldn't have it any other way. In truth, I thought I would have 5 children, and when I had the 3 under 4, I thought, well, maybe I've done my bit for mankind, and we'll leave it at that. So yeah, it was busy, it was hectic, but during that period of Derry, and I see lots of Derry faces here, I was always a blow-in in Derry, because if you're not from Derry, it doesn't matter how long you've lived there, you're a blow-in. But I loved Derry, and Derry was very good to me, and I was the provost when we had City of Culture, and it was an extraordinary time, and time that you took for granted. And it was only when you reflect back, you think, how privileged was I to have this role? So I actually remember being in part of a conversation where we were applying for City of Culture, and you'll not be surprised to hear there were lots of people in Derry who did not want to apply for UK City of Culture because it was a political issue. And I said, if we win this, it will be extraordinary for the city. And we did, and we had, all sorts of events. But when you went to the canteen in Magee, you could have gone in the morning, and this is not, it sounds like exaggeration, but it isn't. John Hume came every day. He came for custard every day on Magee campus, and he had custard at 11 o'clock, and everybody knew that John Hume would be there. Jerry Anderson worked in Foyle. He came every day for his breakfast. Brian Friel was a frequent visitor. Seamus Heaney was a frequent visitor. They would have sat in the canteen and no one passed any notice on them. It was like, oh yeah, there they are. Seamus Dean was also a regular visitor. And it's extraordinary now when you think about it that we took that for granted, that these people were there having their lunch with the students, nobody really passing any notice on them. And as part of City of Culture, Brian Friel came and said, I would like to put on translations in Magee. I will only do it if 100 people are allowed to attend. It can't be the same 100 people. And Adrian Dunbar plays the lead. As if we were going to say no. So we had that for a week, and he was hilarious. He came in and he complained about the tea. He said, these people, you don't know how to make, these people from County Down don't know how to make tea. It's like dishwater. But he was charming, and the students loved him, and there was a great vibe there of people and excitement, and we had the one big weekend, we had sons and daughters concerts, and it was an amazing time for Derry. I was also on the board of ILEX, the Urban Regeneration Company, and I can remember we had the opportunity to build the Peace Bridge. And we had a huge debate, and Niall, you'll know all about this from your days on those board meetings. So basically, we became aware that there was a possibility of getting EU funding for a footbridge. First of all, half the people said, well, why would you want a footbridge? Sure, nobody wants to walk over a bridge. You want a car bridge. And we were saying, no, this is about a footbridge. But we had an opportunity there to apply for the funding, but we didn't have a business case. And you can't apply for anything in Northern Ireland without a business case. But we decided to do what Paddy Bogside used to talk about. We would seek forgiveness and not permission if we got it. We got the money for the Peace Bridge. We went ahead without the say-so of our government. And we were hauled into the Public Accounts Committee and given a complete dressing down by the then First Minister and Deputy First Minister, who said our behaviours were outrageous. Well, without those outrageous behaviours, that Peace Bridge would not have been there. And of course, on the opening day, who were the first people to walk across the bridge and say what a wonderful thing had happened? The First Minister and the Deputy First Minister. But we all smiled knowingly, happy that it had happened and it had come to fruition. Alongside that, I was in Magee and I had a phone call, and the secretary said, the president's on the phone for you. I thought it was the president of the Students' Union. That would have been someone I met on a weekly basis. It wasn't the president of the Students' Union, it was the president of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, and he said, I would like you to be in my Council of State. He has 7 personal nominees to his advisory board. And of course, I said yes, but I actually couldn't believe it. I thought, well, I don't know how he came to me, but it's fantastic. So that was 7 years of being part of the Irish state. It was, again, it sounds like a hard job. It was a fantastic job. Everything that happened in the Irish state, you were involved in. So if visitors came, you got to meet those visitors. So I got to meet the Pope. I got to meet the heads of state in most of the European countries. Of course, very memorably, I got to accompany President Higgins on his first official UK visit to Windsor Castle to meet the Queen and Prince Philip. So that was quite an experience. And actually, when you are there, you do realise the privilege of the position and being part of history. I was also there for the centenary anniversary, so was there 100 years after the Easter Rising, and sitting there and being part of that. and also for my children to go to Aris and meet the President. And they love to tell the story that the first time they went, I spent apparently the whole time from Derry to Dublin telling them how to behave themselves, and how, you know, not to do this and to do that and not to do the other. And President Higgins met us at the front door, and I think they were actually quite sheepish, and he looked at them and he said, "How's the lads?" And I thought, after all that, he was just so down to earth and so friendly and accommodating. And we did have a meeting of the Council of State, where I was sitting there with all of the former presidents, all of the former attorney generals, all of the former Taoiseachs, just sitting there having a complete imposter moment, thinking, what am I doing here? And they're all going to speak, and I'm going to have to speak after them, and what on earth am I going to say after these people? But again, it was just such a privilege. So those were the roles that I had, but I suppose my real job is about research and things that I'm interested in terms of policy and government. And as part of that, so when Edwin Poots was Health Minister in 2012, I was then writing about the health service in Northern Ireland. I became very interested in the health service. So he asked me to be part of Transforming Your Care, which was the biggest review of health and social care since the inception of the welfare state. And we gathered opinion, went round the country, talked to people, and that in itself was an enormous experience. John Compton will tell you that he was part of that. There were 5 of us, and after one of our meetings in Omagh, he got sent a coffin. Feelings were running very high. People who came to those meetings when we were talking about reconfiguring health were very angry that they felt that services were being taken away from them, away from their communities, and no one had explained to them why this was happening. I always remember in Derry, when we went to Derry, we had a meeting in it was in the city side, I think it was in the library, and the people came along in Derry and said, well, why does the hospital have to be in the water side? Like, couldn't we have one on the city side and one on the water side? And we were like, no, the point of this is we're trying to consolidate. But it is important to remember at that stage, or shortly before that, we had cancer services in 17 hospitals in Northern Ireland. And that's unthinkable now, where we have 2 cancer centres and we are getting much better outcomes because people know that they are the specialist centres for cancer. So I've kept that interest in health. I'm working with Professor Bengoa. The sad point about that is we are writing around how it is 10 years after the Bengoa review that said we had to transform our health and social care system or it would collapse. And what we are saying is, why in those 10 years has nothing happened? Is it really just about politics, or is it about the system? Is it about the professions? Is it about vested interests? Or is it that it's just too big for our small part of this island to consider doing something radical? I don't believe that, because Paul was part of the review of public administration where we did change administration in Northern Ireland, and I think if there is a political will, we can do it, but we haven't, and that's deeply disappointing. I'm also on an ARINS group where we're doing cross-border research, so we're doing some research at the moment and getting great support for it around developing all-island cancer services. So we have gone in Northern Ireland from having the best, so we had the worst breast cancer outcomes. We said, this can't happen, we have to have resources, we must change this. We are now back to being the worst. And that's not acceptable, because people are dying because of this. And that's really what angers me and frustrates me. When we were doing, so I also work with the Nuffield Trust in London. And we went to Liverpool, a health trust in Liverpool, just pre-COVID, and looked at a trust exactly the same size as Northern Ireland, 1.9 million people. And we said to them, how many people do you have on a waiting list to see a consultant for more than a year? They said, well, we're really embarrassed to tell you this, but we have 10 people who have been on this list for more than a year. We know who they are, we know their names, we talk about them at every meeting, and we are determined that they will get to see a consultant. What do you think the comparable figure for Northern Ireland was?
Hundreds.
120,000. And I say that because I know we hear all the time in the radio that our waiting lists are bad, or they were out of kilter with the UK. 120,000 we had at that stage. People here are being asked to wait 5 years for operations, 5 years in pain, 5 years with no services, sometimes up to 8 years. And the reality of that is what we are saying to people is, you are going to die without getting the treatment you need unless you can pay for it. That takes us into a two-tier system. Well, the NHS was about us all paying in and it being there for us when we need it. It isn't there for us. I think the message doesn't really get through because we all know that, God forbid, if there was a crash on the Westlink, emergency services would step in and you would be treated. So parts of the system work well, but parts of the system are disastrous. And it has been camouflaged a bit by people who are willing to pay and going to pay. But it is appalling that people are being asked to wait. And our social care system is in disarray. So the fact that people are in, so on any day in Northern Ireland, 500 people are in hospital fit to go home, but with nowhere to go. No care package to allow them to go home. Those people are costing the NHS approximately £1,300 per day. It costs £300 per week to get a care package. How are we allowing this to happen? Plus, you will know if you're in hospital and you want to be at home, you deteriorate mentally, you deteriorate physically, and you get to the stage where you no longer have the confidence to go home. So when we say we have no money, I don't accept that. We spent more per head of population on healthcare, £300 more on healthcare than we do in England, yet their outcomes are vastly better than ours. So when our politicians say, oh, it's because we don't have money, or it's because of the British government, or it's because of austerity, that doesn't stack up. And what frustrates me is we don't have the people here willing to put their hands up or put their heads above the parapet and say, I am sorry, but that is not true. It's wrong, which is why evidence is so important. And sometimes I think people think about academics and think, what do those people actually do? What does a professor do? For me, it's about providing the evidence to say, we have to challenge this. And I could go on forever. I'm probably over my time, am I? I'll finish by saying I published a book last year on mental health because, again, we're in a mental health crisis. And a large part of that is because we talk about early intervention, prevention, but we wait until people get to crisis point. And I know we have the Samaritans here, and you don't need me to tell you that mental health services, the funding is atrocious, but the model is wrong. We worked very hard to get a 10-year mental health strategy, and it is a very good strategy. But without any hoo-ha, the minister said just before Christmas, 80% of the funding is now being removed. So the money that we spent is wasted, and we are not spending money in mental health. Politics is about priorities. You have to say this is a priority and follow through with it and show that you can make a change in people's lives. We seem unable or unwilling to do it. Today I was listening to the debate about minimum pricing, and I'm writing about that in the Irish News, you'll not be surprised to know. And it's deeply frustrating because we know that minimum pricing for alcohol can seriously reduce harm caused by alcohol, that it is not about people saying, well, I don't want to pay another £1 for my glass of wine in the pub or my bottle of wine in the off-licence. Minimum pricing is about that white lightning, that's what it's called, isn't it? Cider, that you can buy cheaper than you buy for a cup of coffee. And it's about ensuring that there's a minimum price for industrial alcohol, which is disproportionately used by heavy drinkers. That's what it's trying to do. There is evidence from Scotland, from Wales, from European countries, from America, from Australia to say this works. All of the parties in the executive, all of the main parties, apart from the DUP, support it. But because of the mandatory coalition system that we have, they can block it. When they were asked why they blocked it, they said, because there's no evidence. There are 57 well-established studies to show that this works. But yet we have silence from the medics. I know that some have come on, but this is where we really need public pushback, where we need the professions to say, sorry, there is evidence. And why are you not taking account of the evidence? What exactly is going on when the party talked about the devil's buttermilk have now decided that they want us to be awash with cheap alcohol? There is clearly some political underlying decision. I think it's about libertarianism, because within the DUP, a wing has emerged since COVID that are anti-vaccines, they're anti-state involvement, they're anti the nanny state. Well, that's all well and good, but public health interventions aren't at an individual level. Many of them are at a population level, and we are doing it for the good of the population and for the good of the future population, so that people don't end up dependent on alcohol. I'm going to stop there because that's my rant over, and I would like some questions.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. Really fascinating talk, and all your leading up to your involvement in the health service was very, very interesting. It was quite clear where your passion is.
Yeah.
It's about the health service, which affects us all. And that's an interesting anecdote about the DUP. The late, great Dr. Ian Paisley, I'm sure,
right,
wouldn't have been happy with his party's stance on the devil's buttermilk. But anyway, we're going to open it up to questions. I'm sure there's loads of questions that people would like to ask.
Are you ever going to fully rest? That's a lot to take.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Siobhan Casey.
Thanks, Stuart. That was really, really, really interesting. I'm just thinking about an article that you wrote in the Irish News a couple of weeks ago on ageism, and considering the number of us in the audience that are over a certain age, would you like to speak a wee bit more about that?
Yeah, so I didn't say because I'm also the Northern Ireland lead, and we very happily brought £15 million in to look at social care in Northern Ireland. And part of that, we're going around looking at the social care system and saying what works, what doesn't work. We know there are problems with the workforce, but we also know there are all sorts of problems for people with dementia. And the social care system is not entirely, but largely used by older people. And when I talk about healthcare, the fact of the matter is we use the healthcare system disproportionately as we get older. So hopefully most of us will get to 65 and have little interaction with the health service. But growing older and an ageing population, I think, is one of the big successes of the NHS. It's something that we should celebrate. Well, I don't know about you, but I think growing older is definitely better than the alternative. But if you read the newspapers, it's about the ageing tsunami, the grey population, the grey vote. What are we going to do with the bed blockers? And it's all very negative. And ageism is rife in Northern Ireland, and it's the last acceptable ism. So we know it's not great to be sexist, and we don't want to be accused of being racist, but ageist is okay, and I think we really have to challenge it. So how that ageism translates to healthcare is there's institutional racism within the NHS, or institutional ageism, so that older people are not included in trials. So we don't know if drugs would work for them or not because they're too old, apparently. Professions, we kind of think as professionals as all beatified, great people within the health service, but they do have ageist attitudes about older people. You'll know that an older person will find if they go in, sometimes the professionals will not address the question to the older person, but to the person with them, as though they're deaf or they can't understand or they need this explained to them in very slow language. And that permeates through the system. It became really clear during COVID-19 when we had do not resuscitate for people without any consent from their family. It's atrocious. And when you think about COVID-19, when I think about ageism, I think if it had have been children dying, in the way that older people were dying. If it had been children in care homes where we were putting in people who had COVID, Northern Ireland would have come to a standstill. Such would have been the outrage. But implicit with the older people was, we don't say it, but implicitly was, well, sure, they're going to die anyway. Or Boris Johnson's let the bodies pile high, and the ageist language about boomer remover. That then leads to self-directed ageism with older people. And so when you talk to older people, they say, well, I didn't bother going. I found a lump, but I didn't bother going because, sure, I'm too old. I'm too old for treatment. Or I'm too old to get my hip replaced. Or I don't want to bother the system and clog it all up. That isn't how it should be. The health system should be there for everyone. Because at what age do you then decide, oh, you're too old for that? Treatment should be there for us all. So I worry about ageism within the system and then how it makes people react, where they know that they have pain, but they won't go and say about it. They know that they have symptoms of cancer, but they're not going to go and get it checked out because A, they don't want to overburden the system because they hear about the system under pressure every day, but also they feel they're of less worth. That's damning of a society to feel that older people are of less worth. And people who've paid into the system all of their lives are now being told they can't access it. Doesn't say much for free at the point of delivery. So you have a big job to do, Siobhan. I don't envy you.
Thank you.
Professor, excuse me, I'd have to sit down. Excuse me. I can relate to your early schooling.
Good.
If I may say that. I had the same experience. I was married in 1962, and I'm approaching 89. You're talking about elderly people there. And when my son was 5, he went to the local school here. Mm-hmm. And my wife, there was a school bus in the mornings to take him down from the Circular Road in Hollywood, on the old Hollywood Road. And there was no bus to come back. So my wife had to go down a UTA bus, and she had 2 hours to wait for a return bus. But anyway, apart from that, I decided we'd have to find another school, more convenient. And that was Belmont Primary School. So I went to the principal there, and she was glad to accept him. So he was 5 at the time, 6, coming 6. So he went to that school. Now, I went, the parish priest here was a Father McCavanagh at that time, and his curate was a dairyman, Father Carlin. So I went after Mass and said that David wouldn't be attending the school anymore. He barred me from attending Mass here. And, he says, I can bar you, and I don't want you to attend Mass here anymore. So that was my experience. And of course, my other 2 girls went to Protestant schools, if you want to call them that, the state schools. So that's my experience, and I can relate to your early days in Banbury.
Early days of school. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'd be interested to hear about your mother. You attended Banbridge Academy. Very interested to hear how she attended Banbridge Academy as well, which sort of, at an earlier stage in the 1950s
Well, I suppose
or whatever.
I think it was a large part to do with geography, because of where she lived. She lived in the parish of Ballela. You'll know Ballela. It's an even bigger metropolis than Annaclone's, a very small rural parish. And the choice was that her sisters had gone to boarding school in Armagh, and she didn't want to board. And so Newry was too far to travel back and forward because the buses weren't there. And so the only feasible way to go to school then was to go to Banbridge Academy. And her mother said, well, that's fine. And that's where she went. And actually, that's where my grandmother went to school as well.
And they were probably the only Catholics in the school, never mind 6%.
They probably were. What I remember about Banbridge Academy actually was quite funny, because there were 7 of us, and obviously that was a very big family compared to the norm of the families we had. And the teachers used to say, not another one. How many are in yours? You know, and some of them, one man particularly taught my mother. So, yeah, I think we were a bit unusual, you know, in that sense.
Deirdre, thank you very much. That was a fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Maybe a 2-part question. There was a lot of media speculation that you were being considered by Fianna Fáil to run for the president yourself. And so maybe the questions are, 1, was that true? And 2, if it was true, have you any regrets?
I don't know what to say about that. The honest answer was I was in discussions with people about it, and it was very flattering. I have no regrets. I am now currently working with the Irish government on cross-border health and looking at the constitutional arrangements here. Yeah, it would have been lovely, but I just thought it wasn't for me. And my mother said, "Why would you want to do that? Sure, you wouldn't be able to take me to the hairdressers on a Friday. It wouldn't work at all." I forgot to mention, I'm looking forward to my first trip to Lourdes. My mother's 86, she lives on her own. So she said to me in a very cunning way, she said, "Would you like to go to France with me?" I thought, yeah, well, that sounds nice. Yeah, okay. And she said, okay, so I'm going to focus, we're going with the parish to Lourdes. So I'll tell you all about that. And I couldn't have done that if I'd been going for the president. But who knows?
Thank you very much. Very interesting. It's covered an awful lot of areas. It mirrors a certain timeline that I have myself. My question to you is, how do you get up in the morning? What do you do? What's the point? Because it all seems pointless. You've got politicians, and even though they're in agreement about some things, they miss the basics. What's the point?
Well, I think the point is we have to keep hope alive. If we don't have hope, then none of us would get out of bed in the morning. It is bad. I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it. I believe that we have developed a consociational model of government, which means we have to have this mandatory coalition. And we find ourselves in a position where we have a choice between bad government, and it is bad government because it has not delivered for anyone. So it's nothing to do for me with party politics. I've never been in a party. I don't want to be in a party, but I would like to see a government that delivers. We have a programme for government with 9 objectives. None of them will be delivered. And I suppose I put it back and I say, I understand it, but we, the public, have to take some responsibility for continually voting for these people. Now, people will say to me, oh, well, there's no alternative, and who would you vote for? There are over 50% of the population in Northern Ireland who do not vote. And if you want to change it, then I think there is a possibility of the right people coming together and presenting an alternative to what we have. Because what we have is fighting about flags, portraits in the City Hall, fish in the pond at Stormont, I heard them on the other morning, and I'm sure, like you, I just shout at the radio and turn it off and think, why are we talking about this when people are dying? But it will only change. It's a bit like the minimum pricing. That will only change when the consultants and the medics and the British medical people and the commissioners stand up and say, no, explain to us why you're not implementing something that will save lives. So I think we have to find our voices and encourage people to find their voices. Because if we, we didn't think that we would end violence, and we did. We're in a period of post-conflict, but we're coming to 30 years after the Good Friday Agreement. I fundamentally think both governments have to reform the system that we have because it is not delivering for anyone. So I get out of bed in the morning because I'm hopeful, and you couldn't be a Manchester United supporter and not be hopeful.
Evening, Deirdre. Thank you very much. You mentioned earlier on your talk about the disconnect between hospital and community.
Mm-hmm.
Do we not have a Department of Health and Social Services, which is quite unique to Northern Ireland? And could that not department then put the pressure on that department how it runs its business to create the environment that you were asking about?
Well, I'm delighted you said that. I have written a book on that. And basically, in theory, we are the only region of the UK that, as you rightly say, have a Department of Health and Social Care. In England, you have the NHS, and social care is run by the local councils. So in theory, we should have a one-stop shop. We have one employer. We shouldn't have problems with delayed discharge. We should have a system where from the day you walk into the hospital to the day you leave, it's seamless, that it's the same social work extent. But it doesn't work like that. That's the theory. The reality is, if you go into a health trust building, it's healthcare this way, social care this way. And healthcare is very much where the focus is. Social care has always been the poor relation living in the shadow of healthcare. So you think about it, if I said to you we're going to talk about healthcare on The View or Nolan or Talkback, you could name the people who are going to talk about healthcare. It would be the Tom Blacks and the Mark Taylors and the BMA and John Compton, and they would be there giving their overall view on what's going on in healthcare. Who would be there for social care? Who speaks for social care? And yet, we are beginning to realise it is without doubt the most important part of the system, because as we get older, more and more of us want to live at home. We want support to live at home. We're not asking for the earth, moon and stars, but we may need some help to live at home. And increasingly we're hearing about, so when we went out and clapped for social care workers, yeah, well, clapping doesn't pay the bills. Some of the social care workers in Northern Ireland, by the way, they're about 98% women. They are on the lowest of low wages. They are treated appallingly. They were promised the living wage. They don't get the living wage. They are travelling around rural areas in all weathers, ensuring that they see people, and that may be the only person that person sees in the day. So the question I sometimes wonder is, why do we treat computer analysts and ICT tech people and anybody that's got creative in their title as of a higher order than people who are looking after our most precious assets, our family members who are vulnerable? Again, it's politics. Being in an integrated care system means when there's literally blood on the floor in the hospitals, they go to social care and raid their budgets because it's an integrated system. When we hear about cuts in health and social care, you don't hear about cuts in management, you don't hear about cuts in senior management, you don't hear about trusts deciding that they're repeating and duplicating all over the place. They cut social care packages for older and vulnerable people. Well, I'm doing some work with him. I'm going to see him in a week. And we believe that it's politics, the political system in Northern Ireland. No politician wants to talk about serious healthcare reform. So if you had healthcare reform, we would have to reconfigure some of our hospitals. I hesitate to say close, but we wouldn't have the number of A&Es that we have across Northern Ireland, because just down the road in Belfast, do we really need all of those A&Es that we are funding, that we are running? We don't. Where do we need the money? We need the money in the community. We need the money so that we have a focus on prevention. How to keep older people in their own homes is about prevention, about falls, it's about early indications of diabetes, it's about cataract surgery at an early stage before it becomes too late. You know, most of Bengoa is actually common sense. There's no rocket science in it. If you have a national health service that is really a national illness service, and by the time people come to it, they're already very unwell, you've failed. Public health here has failed. We are not doing enough to keep people active, to keep people connected. I mean, here tonight, one of the key indicators as to whether or not you're going to, so that this is my rationale for you coming out tonight, is people who feel connected to their communities are much more likely to have a healthier old age than people who don't. Why do we do it? Because we have politicians who won't change. We have professions, a lot of professions who really don't want change either. A lot of vested interests, a huge amount of duplication within the health service. We have a maternity hospital, 10 years overdue. So it was supposed to be delivered in 2015. So 11 years overdue, £57 million over budget. Who has been held accountable for that? Nobody. We handed over a new mental health unit. We had to hand it back because the water system was infected. It's now up to £13 million in repairs. Who is responsible for that? No one, apparently. If you built a house and the builder handed it over to you and there were snags, the builder would be paying for it, not us. So we have shown that we can't deliver large-scale projects. We cannot deliver large-scale health projects. We've built a hospital in Enniskillen that is a PFI, so it's a public-private finance initiative. It's costing us an extortionate amount of money to keep it open. Yet we have theatres in it that we have never opened. And we have 500,000 people on waiting lists. I mean, the whole thing defies logic. It's almost like, what gets me up in the morning is I live in hope that I will waken up some morning and find we have a benign dictator who's just going to do it all.
Well, look, much food for thought, to say the very least. And the more I heard, the angrier I sort of got, bearing in mind
I
that
don't want you to be angry.
I'm a victim in this ageist society that we live in. So I'm going to wrap it up because I can hear the tinkle of fine china outside. There's tea and refreshments for everyone.
I'm very supportive of what you say, Professor. Should we be changing the mindset of individuals? Because we are able to send people down to Dublin to have their hips replaced. You mentioned the place over in Fermanagh. I mean, and then I heard people say, oh, well, how am I going to get to Fermanagh? I have no one to drive. We have to also change the mindset of those who have needing their hips replaced or their knees replaced. And just, I don't know what ism this is, just tell them, do it or you're off the list. Somebody will take that person to Fermanagh for the journey. It's only 2 hours.
I absolutely agree with you. There's nowhere in Northern Ireland that anyone should not be willing to travel to. However, if people had a plan for health and social care, a fully developed plan, where you could say, look, I understand that A&E is being taken from this because the outcomes will be better if we're here, like we did with cancer services. then people wouldn't be feeling like, well, they're taking everything away from us and giving it to those ones all in Belfast. They would understand that it's part of a better plan with evidence. But I don't think that, for example, it means you have to close Daisy Hill Hospital. Daisy Hill Hospital could become the flagship in Northern Ireland for orthopaedics. Everybody who wants hips and knees, go there. And everybody who walks in the door is an expert, from the receptionist, the nursing staff. They know what they're doing. The difficulty is we have a system whereby you might wait for 5 years to get your hip done. You get the call, you're delighted, you pack your overnight bag, get your pajamas ready, take yourself off to the hospital, and there's a crash in the Westlink. Your anaesthetist can't come to you, so you're home and you're back to the back of the list. If we separated elective care, separated the knees and the hips and the eyes into separate units, and that's what they do, away from A&E and emergency care, that wouldn't happen. But we would also have to say to people, we have to address productivity and efficiency in hospitals. Why is it that we can only do 2 knees a day and private hospitals can manage 6 to 8? Now, I know you're not comparing like with like, but there is no incentive to do better. And there are no penalties for doing worse. And until we address that, we are going to be left with the system that we have. And I totally agree with you, people should travel. We went to Canada. People thought nothing of going on 3-hour plane journeys to get their operations because they wanted it and that was normal. So, I agree.
Well, look, thanks very much. And I think we all really enjoyed that. I got the impression in the room, very, very informative, interesting backstory, and then the talk about the health service, which I think should concern us all. And I just think we should give Deirdre a big hand for a fantastic